Welcome to this lesson on methods and functions. So what is a method or a function? A function is a set of instructions that performs one and only one task. A method is a set of instructions that are associated with an object that performs one and only one task. There are two parts to functions and methods. There is the definition and the call. First, let's take a look at the definition. The definition is like a recipe. It's going to tell us how to accomplish the task, what you need, but it does not execute it for you. In coding, you can think of it kind of like this. We have a recipe name, the ingredients required, the instructions that we use on the ingredients, and the final result. In Java, they'll become as followed. The recipe name is the function or method name. The specified return type is before it so that the program knows what to expect. Ingredients become the parameters, which are the values we will get from our code. The body of the code is the instructions that are used, and when they are finally complete, we use a return statement to give the value or result of the method or function back to our rest of our code. Let's create a method piece by piece. We'll name it add and replacing the function name. Since we're going to add two numbers together, we'll replace the type with int, since we know we are going to get an int back. We'll then replace our parameters with two integers that we are going to use in our function and add together. Next, we'll fill out the body of the code. And finally, we'll create a return statement, which will return the result of the final product of our method or function. Please remember that this return statement is the only thing that we are going to get back from this definition. We will not receive any of the rest of these values back in the rest of our code. Next, let's take a look at the call. The call is like when we choose to cook our recipes. We're going to execute the recipe and follow the instructions to create a specified result. It requires the recipe name and ingredients that we are providing in order to give us a result. Let's provide some of the surrounding code in order to use add. Next, let's replace recipe name with add and the ingredients with our arguments. Arguments are the values that we are going to supply to our function or method to replace their parameters so that they have values to use. In this case, we're going to use num1 and num2. Next, let's make sure that we assign our method or function to a value so that we are able to save the return value that we get from our definition. Now let's take a look at what happens if we run our code next to our definition. It will go line by line through our code, and when it reaches our call, it will jump over to the definition. Our first argument will become the first value of our parameter, as well as our second argument will become the value of the second parameter. Notice how the variable names do not need to match up in name, but only in type. This means that num2 in the definition will be equal to num1 from our call. Next, the code will progress through the definition until it reaches the return statement. The return statement will then give that value back to our call and replace the original call with its value. Since this returns 3, this means that our call will be replaced with 3, and that will be then assigned to result. Finally, we will output result back to the user. Now let's take a look at creating a function inside of Java. Okay, so let's take a look at some lessons that we've looked at in the past. For instance, in this case, we are going to look at substring. First, in order to use substring, we are going to require a string. In this case, I'm going to make one named word and give it the value of hello world. Then I'm going to create another string called subword, and I'm going to assign it to the value of word.substring brackets 6. This means that it will give us the value of the substring that starts at index 6 and goes until the end of the string, in this case, world. You'll notice, however, that I require to have word.substring in order to run it. This is what makes it a method. since it is attached to an object. We're going to look at functions though today, since we are not dealing with objects yet, and we are going to look at the fact that their ways of being made are slightly different from the way that methods are. For instance, they are always going to start with public for now, static when creating a function, and then their return type. Static allows us to create a function call without requiring an object in order to run it. Here I'm going to use public static int since I am returning an integer, and then I'm going to name it max because I'm going to return the max value between the two integers provided between num1 and num2. Please keep in mind that these parameters are actually just copies from the arguments that are in the call of the function. They do not alter the original values outside the method unless you are given a reference, such as in the case of arrays. They are also local variables which have no effect on our outside variables. Since our variables inside of our main method are also local, this means that the two variables can have the same names and not affect each other in any way. So let's take a look at the body of this function. I'm going to create an if statement of num1 is greater than num2. In other words, if num1 is the greater number, I want to return num1. Return works similarly to the way break statements worked when we were using if statements and loops before. What they will do is they will end the function or method right at that moment and return the value that has been provided. This means that any code that is written afterwards will not run in this case. This means that I'm going to write a second return statement of return num2, and this will only run if the if statement is false. If the if statement is true, I will never reach this since my original return statement will have stopped my code and returned a value. This means I do not require an else statement like I normally would, since the return causes us to have an else statement by never reaching this code if my statement was true. Now let's take a look at creating the function call. I'm going to create three variables here, the result, and the two numbers I'm going to use inside of my max function. I'm going to give them values of 5 and 4, and then I'm going to make a function call. This function call will have its value assigned to the integer res, or in other words, result, and inside its brackets are the arguments in which I am providing that will be the parameters inside of the function definition. Since they are num1 and num2, my function definition will have the values num1 equal to the value of num1 up here, and num2 equal to the value of num2 up here. Remember, these values do not need to be the same and do not affect each other because they are both considered local. If I were to alter the value of num1 or num2 inside of my function, it would not alter the values of num1 or num2 in my main method. Since num1 is the greater of the two numbers, my if statement will be true, and I will return num1. This means that all code afterwards is ignored, and my call is then replaced with that return value of 5, meaning that res's value will be 5. If I output this, you'll see that I am given the value of 5 as my output, since that's what was returned. That concludes this lesson on functions and methods. Thank you for watching and have a great day.